I want to move us on to the next question because we've been feeling our way round to, I think, the idea of community taking the lead in all this, the bottom-up approach, as people have been perhaps referring to it. And Cleo, it's you again. We need the microphone.
My question is really about how can particularly local authorities actually help the community to organise themselves to be effective. I know we've seen some examples there, but also, is that the role of local authorities? What other agencies can be involved in that process as well?
Okay. Jeff, do you want to come in on this one?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a whole pattern of sort of community-led planning, community bottom-up stuff that's happened for years. I mean, I mentioned village design statements. They were the first, probably anyone anywhere in the world, where local communities can write documents themselves that then go into the system. And they are successful because they're very, very narrowly defined, because they're specifically about that. The difficulty, as you say, as soon as you broaden out, community plans are going, quite rightly, to touch on many issues which are not just to do with planning or design. They're going to touch on social and economic things. And I'm afraid there is no home for those. And too often in the past, people have tried to shoehorn those into the planning system, try to get a very wide-ranging community plan adopted, in some way adopted by the planning system. You can't do that. Unfortunately, you can't get it adopted within the sustainable community strategy, which is where it ought to go. And even if you did, it wouldn't have any meaning and clout. So one of the challenges is how to avoid narrowing down communities' aspirations solely around things that the planning design system can deal with, and yet at the same time give communities some confidence that what they're producing actually has some clout and makes some influence, and rather like the SPD example, that it can actually be held on to once you've done it. Because there is that intense commitment that people make to that process. The moment they see it's not being endorsed or enforced later, they wonder why they even bothered at that stage. So we still have a significant challenge to do what Barry said, is try to make bottom-up meet top-down. So at the moment they're not even meeting, or they're just bypassing each other. I can't give you immediate answers. That's the challenge at the moment.
Barry?
One of the problems I think we might be building up to in the future with especially community-led planning is that we're almost putting too much emphasis on it. And communities are very fluid organisations. They ebb and flow, they come and go. The people who are running community groups sometimes have the time to do that, and then later on in their lives something else happens and they have to change priorities and they have to do something else. And I think we've got to think about succession planning for communities when we've got community-led planning. You know, we've got to be encouraging community groups to reproduce themselves, you know, over time, and certainly not to rely on one or two, you know, very notable people who are going to put in all the effort. Every community group that's involved in a community-led planning structure, I think, has to bear that in mind. It's a really crucial issue, and it's going to come back to us a lot and bite us, I think, if we don't get it right.
And how do you cope with that then, Barry, in urban areas where you've got a very substantial transient population, people who are not going to be there in the long term, people who are there for, say, 3 or 4 years, possibly even student populations?
Yeah.
How do you engage with those sorts of communities?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is really genuinely difficult, but I think one of the things to avoid is putting expectations on people that they will always be there, always be around, and that this isn't going to be a problem for them in the future, and to constantly be thinking about renewing themselves and getting new blood in to help that community process emerge.
This is presumably an issue, Alison, that you faced in the community groups in Bristol.
Yes, one of the issues that we faced was that a number of the groups actually were facilitated in some way by an organisation like Bristol City Council or like some sort of organisation, and when that funding is withdrawn from them, they fall apart because they've been used to having things done for them, not having to think for themselves. And that's why we very much wanted to aim at having resident-led community groups, because then there is an expectation that they've got to do it for themselves. Doesn't mean that the City Council withdraws all assistance, but they're not running it. And in a number of cases, we've got groups that have meetings and then at some stage throw out all the people that are actually representing, you know, the Parks Department, the Housing Department, the Planning Department, you know, you name it. And we just end up with admittedly small group of residents and talk to them about what they want. And it's very interesting that they will then respond. But when there's a room full of officers, they sort of sit back and let them do the talking.
Anybody in the audience got experience of that or want to comment at all on from their experience?
I think the process is really difficult, and in terms of resources, I think it has to be far more integrated as part of the council system and then outwards, because we've got so much funding to create this document that we're creating as part of Love Easton, but what does happen after that? People need to have jobs and make money, and how will this carry on and the whole process carry on? And people be able to engage with that over a long period of time is a really difficult one, and something that does need to be answered, I think. Resources are really difficult. I mean, we've been quite clever as to, work with students to be able to create the document, and, we have got some funding to make it happen, but where it goes after that is a question to be asked.
Just, Craig, if I could turn to you, how do you deal with community-led initiatives if they don't fit in with what your clients in the private sector want to do? How do they cope with that?
I think we're lucky. I think the world's changed. I think it's changed enormously. I think we're talking about community in terms of geography at the moment, and that's the wrong way to talk about communities in general. I think the internet, we're in the 21st century, the means by which we define a community is not about where you live and what you do. There are many different drivers why people commune using IT. And I think the great thing for me, I assumed people knew what they were doing. I assumed that local authorities and bankers were kind of responsible. I assumed that somebody was in charge, but it turns out that's not the case. Nobody knows what they're doing, and that's very empowering to know that. And I actually find myself now facing communities because I see them not only as clients in terms of, it's worthy to see them as a client, it's the right thing to kind of say, as I actually think that's where the development is going to be emerging from. An example of this is we're working with a Dutch developer who's just bought the site next to Temple Mead Station, Temple Gate. And they bring a very different approach to development. They have a phrase called ACIM, it's acquire, control, improve and mature. And the first thing they do, if I reflect back a little bit and say a British model is to acquire and demolish, punt in an application for way too many apartments, which nobody really needs or wants, at prices nobody can get a mortgage for anymore. So, and they actually work with arts groups. They start animating the site, they start getting busy. Another example of that is Hamilton House on Stokes Croft. There's the People's Republic of Stokes Croft, so I think that's a brilliant model in terms of a cultural community, actually changing the way people think. And the developer who owns that building actually got a planning permission to put in residential with a bit of mixed use down at the bottom. He's realised that is not sustainable. He's got two young guys who've set up a company called Coexist, and he said, right, you get a 1-year lease, make this building work. And you now have people sitting on the side of Stokes Croft drinking cappuccino coffees where nobody I ever talked to about this said you could do that. And when they came to us, they said, we've got this idea, we think we should do it in a kind of organic way, but we need £1 million to do it. And I said to them, if this were Berlin in the 1960s, you would have squatted that building and you would now be running a very successful community-led business organisation. And I think that's where the exciting stuff is going to happen. For architects to face towards clients with banks behind them is no longer really where it's at. So I'm very excited about what this financial crisis has done to us. And I think you'll be seeing, and in a vacuum, things happen. And I'm seeing some of that in Bristol now, and it's very exciting.